I stood in the driveway, staring at the empty space where my bike used to be. "We needed the money for Emma's piano lessons," Mom said from the doorway, her voice flat as if she were commenting on the weather. "You weren't using it anyway." I had been using it every single day. It was my way to get to school, to the library, to anywhere that wasn't this house where I felt like a shadow on the wall. The bike had been a gift from my grandmother before she died, the only person who had ever looked at me and seen something worth celebrating. "Where is it?" I asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "Your father sold it this morning. Emma's teacher says she has real talent, Helena. We can't let opportunities like this slip away." Emma. Always Emma. Emma's recitals, Emma's competitions, Emma's future. The golden child who could do no wrong, whose every hobby became the family's mission, while I was expected to be grateful for hand-me-downs and whatever scraps of attention remained after she'd taken her fill. I looked at my mother's face, searching for some sign of regret, some acknowledgement that what they'd done was wrong. But there was nothing. Just that same tired expression she always wore when dealing with me, as if my very existence was an inconvenience she'd learned to tolerate. "That was mine," I said, and hated how my voice cracked. "You're 16, Helena. You need to learn that family means sacrifice. Emma's gifts are rare. Surely you can understand that her development is more important than a rusty old bike." Rusty. Old. As if my grandmother's love could tarnish. As if the hours I'd spent maintaining it, oiling the chain, adjusting the brakes, meant nothing. As if I meant nothing. I walked past her into the house, each step heavier than the last. In the living room, Emma sat at the piano. The beautiful mahogany upright they'd bought last year, the one that cost more than anything they'd ever spent on me. She was playing scales, her fingers dancing across the keys, with practiced ease, completely oblivious to what her lessons had cost me. Or maybe not oblivious. Maybe she knew and simply didn't care. That night, I lay in bed listening to the sounds of the house settling around me. Down the hall, I could hear my parents talking. Their voices a low murmur punctuated by occasional laughter. They sounded happy, content, as if they hadn't just stolen something precious from their own daughter and sold it like it meant nothing. I thought about my father's hands on my bike, wheeling it out to some stranger's car. I thought about the money changing hands, about Emma's piano teacher counting out her fee. I thought about all the times I'd asked for things. A new jacket when mine wore through at the elbows, money for school supplies, permission to join the debate team, and been told we couldn't afford it. But we could afford Emma's piano, and her dance classes, and her art supplies, and now, apparently, private music lessons with the best teacher in the city. The unfairness of it settled over me like a weight, pressing down on my chest until I couldn't breathe properly. I wasn't asking for everything Emma had. I wasn't asking to be the favourite. I just wanted to be seen, to matter, to have one thing that was mine that they couldn't take away. But I had nothing. Even my grief belonged to them now, something to be dismissed as selfishness, as an inability to understand the bigger picture. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but all I could see was the empty space in the driveway, the absence where my bike should have been. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of silent resentment. I walked to school now, an hour each way, while Emma's carpool picked her up at the door. My legs ached and my feet developed blisters, but I said nothing. What was the point? They'd already made their choice. At dinner, they asked Emma about her lessons. She talked for 20 minutes straight about chord progressions and some upcoming recital, and they hung on every word like she was revealing the secrets of the universe. When she finally paused to take a bite of food, Mum turned to me with that obligatory expression of parental interest that never quite reached her eyes. "And how was your day, Helena?" "Fine," I said. She nodded and turned back to Emma, the conversation resuming as if I'd never spoken at all. That night, I lay awake again. But this time, something was different. The weight on my chest had shifted, transformed into something harder, something that felt almost like numbness. I realised I'd stopped crying, stopped hoping they'd notice, stopped believing that things would ever change. This was my life. This was all it would ever be. The acceptance didn't bring peace. It brought a hollow sort of clarity, a realisation that I was fundamentally alone, in a house full of people who should have loved me but didn't. Not really. Not in any way that mattered. I went to school the next day and threw myself into my classes with a desperation that surprised even me. If I couldn't have their love, I could at least have success. I could prove to myself, if not to them, that I was worth something, that I existed. But even that became complicated. When I brought home straight A's on my report card, my father glanced at it and nodded. "Good job," he said, then immediately turned to ask Emma about her piano practice. When Emma brought home B's and C's, they consoled her, told her she was doing her best, that academics weren't everything. Look how talented she was in music. The double standard was so blatant it would have been funny if it hadn't hurt so much. Months passed. The bike's absence became just another fact of my life, another way I was less important than my sister. I walked to school through rain and heat, through the early morning cold of autumn and the bitter winds of winter. My shoes wore through. I patched them with cardboard and duct tape. Anything, to avoid asking my parents for new ones, knowing what the answer would be. Then Daniel came into my life. He was new to the school, quiet and watchful, with dark eyes that seemed to notice things other people missed. He sat behind me in calculus, and one day after class, he asked if I wanted to study together. I almost said no. I'd learned not to trust kindness, learned that usually came with the strings attached. But there was something genuine in his expression, something that made me say yes. We met at the library that afternoon, and for the first time in months, I felt like someone actually saw me. He asked questions about my life and listened to the answers. He noticed when I was tired, when the walk to school had been particularly difficult. He didn't offer empty sympathy or try to fix things. He just acknowledged that what I was going through was hard. It felt like water in a desert. Over the next few weeks, we grew closer. He walked with me to school sometimes, cutting his own travel time in half just to keep me company. He shared his lunch when mine was meagre. He made me laugh, something I'd almost forgotten how to do. And slowly, carefully, I let myself believe that maybe I wasn't as invisible as I'd thought. Maybe someone could see value in me that my own family couldn't. "Why don't they care about you?" he asked one afternoon, his voice gentle but confused. We were sitting on a bench outside the library, our homework spread between us. "You're brilliant, Helena. You're kind and funny, and you work harder than anyone I know. How can they not see that?" I shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "Emma's special. I'm just not." "That's not true," he said fiercely. "You're extraordinary. They're just too blind to realise it." His words settled into the hollow places inside me, filling spaces I hadn't realised were empty. For the first time in years, I felt like I mattered, like I was more than just the disappointing daughter, the one who existed in the margins of Emma's spotlight. I should have known it was too good to be true. It started small, Daniel cancelling plans at the last minute, being distracted when we studied together, taking longer to respond to my messages. I told myself he was busy, that I was being paranoid, that not everything had to be a betrayal. Then one day I came home early from school, feeling sick, and found him sitting in our living room with Emma at the piano. "Helena," my mother said, surprise flickering across her face. "You're home early. Daniel stopped by to listen to Emma practice. Isn't that sweet of him?" I looked at Daniel. He had the grace to look uncomfortable, but not guilty, not apologetic, just uncomfortable, like I'd walked in on something awkward rather than devastating. "You know Emma?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We met last week when I walked you home," he said. "She invited me in to hear her play. Helena, she's incredibly talented. I didn't know your sister was this good. My sister. As if that connection to me was incidental, as if he'd discovered Emma entirely on his own merits, rather than through the relationship he'd built with me. We've been spending some time together, Emma said, smiling that perfect smile she always wore when she knew she'd won something. Daniel loves music. He's been helping me prepare for my recital. The world tilted sideways. Daniel, who had listened to me pour out my heart about feeling invisible in my own family, was now sitting in my living room bonding with the person who'd made me invisible. And my parents were beaming at both of them like this was the most natural thing in the world. I should have mentioned it, Daniel said, finally meeting my eyes. But I didn't think you'd understand. Emma and I just connect. We have so much in common. You have so much in common, I repeated flatly. Like what? Piano? Music, art, creativity, Emma said, her voice soft and understanding in that maddening way she had. Daniel appreciates things like that. No offense, Helena, but you're so focused on academics and practical things. You wouldn't really get it. I wouldn't get it. As if my grandmother's bike, the thing they'd sold for Emma's lessons, hadn't represented something deeper than transportation. As if I didn't understand the value of passion and beauty just because I expressed it differently. I need to talk to you, I said to Daniel, my voice tight. He followed me outside, and I turned to face him on the front lawn where my bike used to be parked. What is this? I asked. I didn't plan it, he said, defensive now. But Emma and I... There's something there, Helena. I can't just ignore it. You can't ignore it, I said slowly, each word deliberate. The connection you have with my sister. The sister who you knew had everything while I had nothing. The sister who represents everything that's broken in my family. You can't ignore that. It's not about you, he said, and those words hit harder than anything else. This thing with Emma, it's separate. It doesn't change what we have. We don't have anything, I said, and felt the truth of it settle into my bones. You're right. It's not about me. Nothing ever is. I walked past him back into the house, climbed the stairs to my room and closed the door. I didn't slam it. I didn't cry. I just sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall, feeling the last bit of hope drain out of me like water through a sieve. That night at dinner, my parents couldn't stop talking about what a nice young man Daniel was. How wonderful it was that he appreciated Emma's talent. How perfect they seemed together. Emma blushed and smiled, playing the role of the modest prodigy who'd captured the heart of a good man. No one asked how I felt about it. No one even looked at me. After that, things accelerated quickly. Daniel and Emma became officially together, and suddenly he was at our house all the time, attending her practices, driving her to lessons, taking her to concerts. He moved through my life like I was a ghost, acknowledging me with awkward nods and strained small talk, treating me like a distant acquaintance rather than someone he'd once claimed to care about. My parents loved him. Finally, Emma had found someone worthy of her, someone who understood her gifts. The fact that he'd been my friend first, that his presence in our house was a constant reminder of my own inadequacy, never seemed to occur to them. Or maybe it did, and they simply didn't care. I stopped eating dinner with them. I came home from my long walks, went straight to my room, and studied until I fell asleep over my books. I stopped participating in family activities, stopped pretending that I was part of this unit rather than an outsider observing it from a distance. The numbness from before returned, but deeper now, more complete. I wasn't just invisible, I was erased, and the worst part was that I'd done it to myself by daring to hope, by believing that someone could see me as more than just Emma's shadow. I graduated valedictorian. My parents came to the ceremony because it would have looked bad not to, but they spent the entire time whispering about Emma's upcoming recital, about how proud they were of her progress, about the scholarship opportunities she was being considered for. When I gave my speech about perseverance and finding strength in adversity, my mother checked her phone. My father stared past me at something in the distance. Emma sat between them, Daniel's arm around her shoulders, looking bored. I came home that night, hung my graduation robe in the closet next to my worn-out clothes and shoes, and realised that nothing would ever change. This was my life. This was my family. And I had to accept that I would never be enough for them, no matter what I achieved or how hard I tried. The acceptance was different this time. Not numb, not hollow, just final. That night, walking home from a late study session at the library, because even after graduation I couldn't stay in that house, I barely noticed the car running the red light until it was too late. There was a screech of brakes, a moment of weightlessness, and then nothing. Not pain, not fear, just a strange sense of relief, of finally being released from a burden I'd been carrying for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to exist without it. I thought about my grandmother's bike, about the empty space in the driveway, about all the ways I'd tried and failed to matter to the people who were supposed to love me. And then I thought about nothing at all. I woke up to the sunlight streaming through my bedroom window. For a moment, I lay there confused, disoriented. The last thing I remembered was the street, the car, the impact. This couldn't be right. This couldn't be real. I sat up slowly, my hands moving to check my body for injuries, for any sign of what had happened. But there was nothing. No pain, no bruises, just my 14-year-old body, younger and softer than the one I remembered. 14. I looked around the room, taking in details I'd forgotten. The posters on the wall from a band I'd loved at that age, the textbooks stacked on my desk from freshman year, the alarm clock showing a date that made my heart stop. 2 years before they sold my bike, 2 years before Daniel, 2 years before everything fell apart. I should have been shocked, terrified, confused about what was happening or why. But instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of clarity, as if I'd been given the answer to a question I'd been asking my entire life. This was my second chance. Not to change them. I understood now that they would never change, that their neglect wasn't about my failure, but about their own blindness. But to change myself. To stop seeking validation from people who would never give it. To stop making myself small to fit into the spaces they left for me. I got out of bed and looked at myself in the mirror. The face staring back was younger, less worn down by years of invisible tears and silent suffering. But the eyes were different now, older, knowing. I had lived through this once, had made all the mistakes, had believed all the lies I told myself about family and love and what I deserved. I wouldn't make those mistakes again. Downstairs, I could hear the familiar sounds of morning. My mother making breakfast, Emma practicing scales on the piano, my father reading the news on his tablet. The same routine that had played out every day of my previous life, the one I'd thought was immutable. But nothing was immutable. Everything could change. I dressed quickly and went downstairs. Emma was at the piano, my mother was at the stove, my father was at the table. They looked exactly as I remembered, exactly as they always had. But I was different now. "Good morning," I said. My mother glanced up. "Morning, Helena. There's oatmeal on the stove. Emma's teacher called yesterday. She wants to increase Emma's lessons to twice a week. Isn't that exciting?" In my previous life, I'd said nothing, had swallowed the familiar bitterness and gone to school in silence. This time, I met my mother's eyes and spoke calmly. "That's expensive," I said. "How are we paying for it?" She blinked, surprised. "We'll manage. Her teacher says she has real potential." "I'm sure she does," I said, pouring myself coffee instead of the oatmeal I'd choked down for years. "But we should be realistic about the budget. I've been looking at summer job opportunities. I can contribute to household expenses." "That's very mature of you," my father said, glancing up from his tablet with that same distant expression. "But I don't think that's necessary." "I want to," I said simply. "I'd like to start saving for college anyway, and a car eventually." Emma stopped playing. "A car? You're only 14. "I have time to save," I said, smiling at her. It wasn't a warm smile. I was done pretending affection I didn't feel. But it wasn't cruel either. Just neutral. Planning ahead is important. I could see the confusion on their faces, the slight uncertainty about how to respond to this version of me who spoke with confidence instead of apology. But I didn't wait for their response. I finished my coffee, grabbed my backpack, and headed for the door. "Where are you going so early?" my mother called after me. "Library," I said. "I have studying to do." It was true, but not in the way she thought. I had 2 years of memories to organise, 2 years of mistakes to avoid, and a complete reconstruction of my life to plan. I needed space and silence to think, and I wouldn't find that in a house where I'd never been a priority. The library became my sanctuary. I mapped out everything I remembered, the timeline of events, the decisions I'd made, the opportunities I'd missed because I'd been too focused on trying to win love that was never going to come. I planned differently now. I got a job at a local bookstore working weekends and evenings. The money wasn't much, but I saved every penny, watching my account grow with a satisfaction that had nothing to do with my parents' approval. I studied harder than before, but not for the grades. I already knew I could ace every class. I studied because I enjoyed it, because knowledge was power, because every hour spent learning was an hour I controlled completely. When my parents asked about family time, I was polite but firm. "I have work," I said, or "I have studying." I didn't make excuses or apologise. I simply stated facts and removed myself from situations where I'd previously tried to force myself to belong. The change confused them. My mother attempted several conversations about whether everything was okay, whether I was upset about something, whether I needed to talk. I answered honestly each time. Everything was fine. I wasn't upset. There was nothing to talk about. I just had priorities and goals that required my time and attention. The truth was, I wasn't angry anymore. Anger required investment, required caring about their opinion of me. I'd moved beyond that into something clearer and cleaner, simple acknowledgement of reality. They loved Emma. They would always love Emma more. And that was fine, because I no longer needed their love to know my own worth. Emma noticed the change too. She'd try to engage me in conversation about school or friends, that same slightly condescending tone she'd always used when addressing me. But where I used to respond with desperate eagerness, grateful for any crumb of sisterly attention, now I kept my answers brief and impersonal. "How's school?" she'd ask. "Good," I'd say, and return to my book. "Are you mad at me about something?" "No," I'd say truthfully. "I'm just busy." She couldn't understand it. In her world, I'd always been the one seeking her approval, trying to measure up to her accomplishments. The fact that I'd stopped seeking, stopped trying, left her uncertain about where she stood. But that wasn't my problem to solve. Months passed. I continued working, saving, studying. I researched scholarships and universities, planning a future that had nothing to do with this house or these people who shared my last name. I wasn't running away, I was building towards something, and there was a crucial difference. Then came the day I'd been waiting for. I was 16 now, exactly the age I'd been when they sold my bike. I'd known it was coming, had prepared for it, but still felt my heart rate increase when I came home from school and saw my father loading something into a stranger's truck. My bike. My grandmother's bike, with its worn seat and reliable gears, the one she'd given me because she had known I'd appreciate it. I stood at the end of the driveway and watched, my face calm, my breathing steady. My mother came out of the house, saw me standing there, and had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Helena," she said, "we were going to talk to you about this. Emma's piano teacher recommended private lessons, and we thought, well, you don't use the bike much anymore since you have your job." "I use it every day," I said quietly. "I've been maintaining it. The chain was oiled last weekend," she faltered. "We need the money for Emma's lessons. You understand, don't you? Her talent is so rare." "How much are you getting for it?" I interrupted. "What?" "The bike. How much is he paying you?" My father walked over, pocketing cash from the sale. $300. It's a fair price for an old bike." I reached into my bag and pulled out my wallet. Slowly, deliberately, I counted out $300 in bills I'd earned and saved over the past 2 years. I held the money out to my father. "Here," I said, "for Emma's lessons. Now give me back the bike." The stranger had already driven away. My father stared at the money in my hand, confusion and something that might have been shame crossing his face. "It's already gone," my mother said weakly. "I see," I said, pocketing the money. "Then, I suppose Emma's lessons will have to wait until you can afford them another way." "Helena," my father said, his voice taking on that stern tone he used when he thought I was being difficult. "Don't be selfish. This is for your sister's future." "And my bike was for my present," I said calmly. "You made your choice. I'm simply clarifying that I won't be funding it." I walked past them into the house, up to my room, and closed the door. I could hear them talking downstairs, their voices rising in frustration and confusion. They couldn't understand why I wasn't playing my role anymore, why I'd stopped being the compliant, understanding daughter who sacrificed everything for Emma's dreams. But I was done sacrificing, done accepting that my needs would always come second, that my belongings were community property while Emma's were sacred. That night at dinner, the tension was thick enough to cut. Emma kept glancing at me, uncertain and slightly afraid, an expression I'd never seen on her face before. My parents tried to act normal, but their questions came out sharper than usual, their praise of Emma more pointed, as if they could force me back into my old patterns through contrast. I ate my meal in silence, answered when spoken to, and excused myself to study. Later, lying in bed, I heard them arguing in hushed voices about whether to punish me, whether this was a phase, whether they should be concerned. But they didn't come to my room, didn't ask what had changed or why, because that would require seeing me as a person with thoughts and feelings, and they'd never been capable of that. Life continued. I kept working, kept saving. The bike's absence hurt, but differently than before. I mourned the loss of my grandmother's gift, but I didn't mourn the relationship with my parents, because I'd finally accepted it had never existed in the first place. I researched the best cars for reliable transportation and fuel efficiency. I compared prices, calculated loan terms, considered insurance costs. By the time I was 17, I had enough saved for a down payment and a solid credit score from the part-time credit card I'd been using responsibly. I bought the car on a Saturday morning. Nothing fancy, just a reliable sedan with good mileage and a reputation for longevity. The salesman congratulated me, impressed that someone my age had the credit and down payment to qualify for financing without a cosigner. "You must have worked hard for this," he said as he handed me the keys. "I did," I said, and felt pride settle warm in my chest. I drove home carefully, still getting used to the feel of the car, the weight of independence in my hands. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw my father working in the yard. He looked up, surprised, then walked over as I parked. "Whose car is this?" he asked. "Mine," I said, getting out and running my hand along the hood. "I bought it this morning." He stared at me, then at the car. You bought a car? How?" "I've been saving," I said simply. "From my job." the one I got 2 years ago. We didn't know you were saving for a car, my mother said, coming out of the house with Emma behind her. You should have told us. We could have helped. I almost laughed. Could have helped, as if they'd ever helped me with anything. As if they hadn't stored my only means of transportation for Emma's endless lessons. I didn't need help, I said. I handled it myself. Emma was staring at the car with something that looked almost like envy. It's nice, she said quietly. Really nice. Thank you, I said, and meant it. Because it was nice, but more importantly, it was mine. Earned through my own effort, purchased with money I'd saved dollar by dollar, belonging to me in a way nothing in this house ever had. Well, my father said, still processing, this is very responsible of you. Congratulations, I suppose. I supposed. Always the qualifiers, the hesitation, the inability to give me a compliment without making it sound like surprise that I'd managed to accomplish something. I'm going out, I said, getting back in the car. I'll be back later. I drove with no destination in mind, just the pleasure of movement, of control, of having something that was entirely and completely mine. I drove past the school where I'd walked for so long, past the library where I'd spent countless hours studying, past all the places that held memories of that first life where I'd been so desperate for love that I'd lost myself. That evening I drove past the music school where Emma took her lessons, the lessons they'd sold my bike to pay for. I didn't stop, didn't slow down, just drove past with my windows down and my music playing, feeling the wind in my hair and the steering wheel solid in my hands. Time moved forward. I graduated again, valedictorian again. But this time when I gave my speech, I didn't look at my parents in the audience. I looked at my future, at the scholarship offers and acceptance letters that represented everything I'd built for myself. And Daniel never entered my life at all. I saw him at school sometimes. He transferred in during my junior year just as I'd remembered. But when he approached me in calculus, I smiled politely and said I preferred to study alone. He looked disappointed, maybe even hurt, but I didn't care. I'd learned that lesson already. I watched from a distance as he noticed Emma, as the same attraction developed. But this time there was no betrayal, because there was nothing to betray. He was just some boy, she was just my sister, and their relationship had nothing to do with me. My mother tried to push us together during family dinners after they started dating. Daniel, you and Helena are in the same grade, she'd say. You two must have classes together. Helena's at the top of her class, you know. That's impressive, Daniel would say politely, and I'd nod and pass him the salt. Emma would watch these exchanges with a strange expression, as if she couldn't quite understand why I wasn't competing with her, why I seemed so completely uninterested in the boy she was dating. But how could I compete over something I didn't want? How could I be jealous of a relationship I'd already lived through and found worthless? The day of Emma's big recital arrived, the one they'd sold my bike for, the one that was supposed to launch her career as a serious pianist. The whole family was expected to attend, to sit in the audience and applaud her talent. I had a shift at the bookstore. I'd requested it specifically, had marked the calendar weeks in advance. You have to call in sick, my mother said when she realised. This is Emma's most important performance. I can't, I said calmly. We're short-staffed. I gave my word I'd be there. Helena, this is family, my father said, his voice stern. Family comes first. I looked at him for a long moment. This man who had raised me without ever seeing me, who had sold my grandmother's gift without asking permission, who had spent my entire life proving through action that family only came first when it was convenient. I'll try to make the next one, I said, knowing I wouldn't. I went to work. I shelved books and helped customers, and took my break outside, sitting on a bench in the evening air, feeling peaceful and whole in a way I'd never felt in that concert hall watching Emma perform. Later, I heard the recital was a success. Emma had played beautifully, received a standing ovation, impressed all the right people. My parents came home glowing with pride, already planning her next steps, talking about competitions and conservatories. They didn't mention my absence except to exchange meaningful looks, as if my missing the recital confirmed something they'd always suspected about my character. I smiled and congratulated Emma sincerely. "I'm glad it went well," I said, and I was. Not because I cared about her piano career, but because her success meant they'd continue to focus on her, to pour their time and money and attention into her future, leaving me free to build my own. College came. I'd been accepted to several universities, all with substantial scholarships that reflected years of hard work and strategic planning. I chose one 3 states away, far enough that I couldn't be expected home for every weekend, close enough that the distance wouldn't seem deliberately hurtful. Moving day arrived. I'd packed my belongings carefully, efficiently, taking only what was mine, what I'd earned or bought or received from people who'd actually cared about me. The pile was smaller than Emma's wardrobe, but more valuable than anything in the house. I loaded boxes into my car, the car I'd bought myself, that represented everything I'd learned about self-reliance and worth, while my parents hovered uncertainly, as if they'd suddenly realised I was leaving and weren't sure how they felt about it. "You'll call when you get there?" my mother asked. "Of course," I said. "And you'll come home for Thanksgiving?" "If I can," I said, knowing I'd probably work the holiday, earn extra money, and enjoy the peace of an empty campus. Emma helped carry the last box. She'd been quieter lately, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. As I closed the trunk, she touched my arm. "Are you mad at me?" she asked. "About everything?" I looked at her, my sister, the golden child, the one who had taken so much without ever realising what it cost me. She looked genuinely confused, genuinely concerned, as if my emotional distance was a puzzle she couldn't solve. "No," I said honestly. "I'm not mad at you." "Then why do you feel so far away?" I smiled, not unkindly. "I'm just moving forward, Emma. We all have to, eventually." I hugged my parents briefly, conventionally, the way you'd embrace distant relatives at a funeral. Then I got in my car, adjusted my mirrors, and started the engine. As I pulled me out of the driveway, I glanced at the empty space where my bike used to be, the space that had represented everything wrong with my first life, everything I'd learned to overcome in my second. Then I looked ahead at the open road, at the future I'd built with my own hands, and drove forward without looking back. Years passed. I called home occasionally, visited rarely, maintained a polite distance that allowed for pleasant, superficial relationships without the pain of deeper connection. My parents slowly adjusted to having a daughter who didn't need them, who had built a life entirely independent of their support or approval. Emma's piano career plateaued. She was good, very good even, but not exceptional enough to make it as a professional musician. She ended up teaching piano to children, performing at local events, living a perfectly fine life that was nonetheless smaller than the future my parents had once imagined for her. She called me sometimes, usually when she was drunk or sad, asking questions about what had changed, when I'd stopped needing them, whether I'd ever forgive her for being the favourite. "There's nothing to forgive," I'd tell her, and it was true. She'd been a child playing the role our parents assigned her. The real fault had been theirs, and I'd stopped carrying it years ago. Daniel and Emma broke up eventually. He'd wanted someone who matched the image he'd built in his head, and she'd wanted someone who would worship her talent. Neither was capable of seeing the other as a real person. So the relationship had failed, as it was always going to fail. I dated casually through college and after, building relationships based on mutual respect and genuine connection, rather than desperate need for validation. Some lasted, some didn't, and I was okay with all of it because my worth was no longer tied to whether someone else chose to see it. I graduated with honours, got a good job in a field I loved, bought a house with my own money. I built a life that was quiet and stable and entirely mine, filled with people who valued me and work that challenged me, and moments of peace that felt earned rather than granted. And sometimes, driving home from work on a Thursday evening, I'd think about my grandmother's bike, about the girl I'd been who had loved it so much, who had maintained it carefully, who had built her world around the freedom it represented. That bike was gone, had been gone for years now, sold by people who didn't understand its value, used to fund dreams that were never mine. But I wasn't gone. I had survived my first life and rebuilt myself in the second. I had learned that the people who should love you sometimes won't, that fairness is a construct and family is complicated, that the only person you can truly rely on is yourself. I had learned to be enough for myself. One afternoon, I drove past my parents' house, not to visit, just passing through town on the way to somewhere else. I saw my father in the yard, older now, greyer, my mother's car in the driveway, Emma's piano visible through the front window, and in the driveway, the empty space where my bike used to be, still empty after all these years. I didn't stop, didn't slow down, just drove past in my car. Not the first one I'd bought with my savings, but a newer model I'd recently purchased, reliable and comfortable and completely paid off. I drove past and I felt nothing but the satisfaction of movement, of forward momentum, of a life lived on my own terms. They'd sold my bike for her lessons. In return, I'd learnt the most valuable lesson of all, that love, freely given but never returned, isn't love at all, that sacrifice without recognition is just loss, and that the only person who could save me was myself. I'd saved myself. I'd built a life, I'd found peace, and driving past them now, windows down and music playing, I realised I'd found something even better than revenge. I'd found freedom.